Good morning, everyone. My name is Gillian Askew, and I am going to be your host for this session this morning on marketplace development for procurement and commissioners. So we'll just let people join over the next few seconds, and while we do that, I will just cover some housekeeping. So, as I said, I'm Gillian Askew. I'm one of 3 co-founders and directors of an organisation called Go for Growth. We're going to be chatting about marketplace development for procurement and commissioners today, but the session should be as relevant and as useful if you're in a smaller organisation, a business, private sector, wherever. So in terms of housekeeping, as you know, because you've joined us, we're on Zoom today, the session is being recorded. A copy of the recording and a copy of the slide deck will be sent out to everyone after the event. We usually do that within about 48 hours. And as we're on Zoom, we have chat functionality and Q&A functionality today. If you would like to say hi, introduce yourself, please do feel free using the chat functionality. It's not mandatory though, so please do that if you feel comfortable doing so. If you have any questions throughout the session, if you could use the Q&A functionality, that would be useful, but I will try and keep an eye on both chat and Q&A. We do have some time for questions carved out at the end, but please do feel free to fire them in as we go, and I'll try and pick them up either as they come up or at that time that we've got at the end. So hopefully over the next 30 minutes or so, what I'm going to try to cover is the procurement SME journey. So I'm going to talk through some analytics of a joint survey that we did with YPO that polled around 150 buyers and commissioners. In addition, we've got around 36,000 pieces of evidence-based intelligence from small to medium enterprises. 90% of that comes from micro organisations and small businesses, up to about 49 employees. I'm going to talk through some of the challenges and barriers as told to us by smaller organisations. And there are some recommendations that we've made through research projects that we've undertaken with organisations like London Anchor Institution Network and the Greater London Authority. So I'll chat through just some of those recommendations. And then we've got some tips today in terms of supporting marketplace development. Given also that technology is all around us, I'm going to look very briefly at the use of artificial intelligence, which is a hot topic at the minute, but also thinking about that in the context of other support in bids and tenders processes. And then finally, we'll finish up with the Procurement Act 2023 and what that might mean for small to medium enterprises. The slide deck that comes out to you will also include some information on the Go for Growth programme. So if anyone would like to chat more about what we're doing or you'd like to get involved working with us, please don't hesitate to shout. My contact details and my colleagues' contact details will also be in the slide deck. So that will come out to you. So please feel free to take some notes if you want to, but everything that you see on screen will come out to you as well. So if I start by thinking about those 150 buyers and commissioners that we polled, 64% of all of those participants cited bid competition and capability as a barrier to SME adoption. That was particularly significant actually in respondents that were working in local government situations and context, with 43 out of 88 stating that they found this to be a barrier. But overall, 64% of survey participants said that it was a potential barrier. And I think that manifests itself in practical terms in a couple of ways. Firstly, for those buyers and commissioners that are on the call this morning, and I'm a procurement professional by trade, almost 30 years in, so this is my view as well. What we really want to see are really good quality answers to our bid questions, whether that's the technical questions or social value questions. And what we want to be doing is giving good scores out. And actually part of the concern then is that the quality of those answers is just not where it needs to be able to successfully award to smaller organisations. And I think what we see in Go for Growth as well, actually, is that bid and competition capability, the businesses that we're talking to, 95% of them, the businesses that we're working with and supporting, have said that they also want help with that. And so I think that how that manifests itself is that organisations are potentially walking away before they even actually submit a bid. And it's a good couple of years ago, but there was one particular case that triggered quite a lot of analysis by Go for Growth on expressions of interest versus bid conversion. One organisation, and it was a local authority in this case, had 100 expressions of interest, but only one bid. And when we surveyed the 99 that chose not to put a bid in, actually quite a lot of the respondents to that survey told us that they didn't think they had the time, the skills, or the resources to actually put a bid in. They felt that they had the time, the skills, and the resources to deliver what was requested. And I think that's a really key distinction. But the bid competition process in itself, in and of itself, was actually a barrier. And so actually, I think what we see in that is that both the procurement community and the small business community agree that there are support requirements for, especially for smaller organisations in the voluntary sector, to be able to increase their bid capability and bid skills. Just before I move on, what you can see at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen is a link to the survey. So you can have a look at the full survey. It's on the YPO website, on the Go for Growth pages on there, but that will take you directly to the full survey results. So you can have a look at that as well. And then secondly, 42% of survey participants said that they were concerned about the ability of smaller organisations to scale the service delivery appropriately throughout the life of the contract. And actually, we see that as much as of an issue or a concern, if you like, in private sectors as much as we do in public sector. And we were speaking to a well-known online platform recently, and they said what they really want is rapid scalability in lots of their providers. Not all of them, obviously, but lots of providers, regardless of their size. Because helping their providers to grow is a super important consideration for them, and it's really embedded in everything that they do. But lots of smaller organisations, especially, struggle with scaling at all, but definitely the rapidity of that scale. And so there's a real concern that once people are working with a commissioning organisation, that they won't necessarily be able to scale appropriately over the life of the contract. And then 32% of participants said that risk management was, or actually that there was a real lack of confidence about the ability to manage risk, was also a potential barrier to working with small to medium enterprises. And potentially, and I'm not saying that this is a reality, but potentially that could lead to a potential bias being in place. And what we see is some of that bias perhaps coming out in this survey. So there's a preference to work with previous or well-known players, almost as a mechanism, I think, for de-risking that process. So almost offsetting that last point. So 28% of respondents talked about having an indication to preferencing to work with somebody that they'd worked with before, and 31% expressed a preference to work with well-known and established providers. And I guess the reason being is that risk profile that's associated with working with someone smaller or someone that you've never worked with before is obviously higher than someone you've worked with and had the track record with you versus are a well-known or an established brand and supplier. And then if we think about the overall spend with SMEs, 150 different organisations that responded to the survey, 46% of respondents said that SMEs accounted for 50% or less than their overall procurement spend. And of that, 46%, the majority, 28% of the 46%, said that they estimated that the number of SMEs were below 25%. And actually, a really whopping 30% of respondents admitted that they didn't know what the volume of contracts to smaller enterprises were that they were getting from their organisation. So clearly some measurement and baselining gaps in that data. And when we talked to 150 buyers and commissioners, we asked them what we thought would have the greatest impact on their procurement strategy over the coming period. And so, that period, we're going to estimate at, say, 2 to 3 years potentially. 71% of those respondents said that sustainability and the green agenda were going to be the single biggest impact on procurement strategy. And if we think about what social value, sustainability, and the green agenda means, certainly in terms of social value, and I'll come on to Procurement Act shortly, certainly in terms of social value, working with SMEs is really important, and it's a core element of that. And if we think about that in terms of carbon reduction for a second, for example, as well as the broader environmental agenda, if we 99.3% of all businesses, and I think that's the number, certainly it's over 99% of all the businesses in the UK are small to medium enterprises, then actually we're really going to need our supply chains to be able to deliver on carbon reduction, carbon net zero, transitioning to low carbon economy, and delivering social impact. Otherwise, those things aren't going to happen. So if we think that the greatest impact, 71% of respondents, if we think that extrapolates out, and that is the single most impactful part of the procurement strategy over the next few years, then really we have a really great opportunity to think about how we take that supply base and that business and voluntary sector community on the journey with us. Interestingly, if we think about social media, for example, and I'll come back to the procurement regulations in a second. If we think about social media, for example, about advertising opportunities, I'll caveat it by saying, well, we're not talking about is obviously replacing procurement portals, but about understanding where your market is active. In a procurement context, only 5% of those people that we talked to said they use social media to raise awareness in business communities of their procurement opportunities. And I think that's really interesting, actually, because out of the 11,000 organisations that we're supporting, over 99% of them tell us that they're most active on social media platforms such as Facebook and to an extent LinkedIn, and to a lesser extent X, Twitter, but actually Twitter just seems to be a little bit up and down at the minute. There's a lot more use of TikTok, for example, but Facebook, absolutely. LinkedIn, probably as a secondary measure. And so whilst that's very untraditional from a procurement perspective, that is where the local marketplace is. And so it sort of begs the question, if you want people to know about the opportunity that you've got, do you need to go to them as opposed to expecting them to come to you? So 16% said they didn't know how they advertised. 61%, unsurprisingly, said that they use portals, Finder, Tender Service, Contracts Finder, and their own organisation or website. But I think the discussion around how we want to access the SME market, we need to know where the SME market is active, and we probably need to think about how we go to them. And I think, if I come back to that 63% of 150 people who took part in the survey said that the new regulations are going to be the greatest impact on procurement strategy. Embedded in the Procurement Act 2023 is about removing barriers to SMEs. And so there's some real linkage, I think, with thinking about how do we access this market? How do we become visible to them? Transparency is all over public regulations now, never mind in Procurement Act 2023. How can we best get our messaging out to the marketplace that we're trying to engage? So some intelligence from small to medium enterprises. So this is through the 36,000 plus engagements across 11,000 businesses that Go for Growth is supporting. Over the 4 years that we've been around, we've been building information and intelligence around what businesses need. And I'm just going to give you a super quick headline in terms of what we're being told. There's a lot more data that sits behind this. And so we're a fairly equitable split in terms of what type of help is needed. So 52% of organisations we're supporting are wanting help to improve. So not necessarily their first time working in the public sector, but it could be the first time that they're going through a tender process. So they could have been in a grant funding application that's now transitioned to commission services. It could be that it's been so low value that it's been 3 quotes and a much easier, simpler process. And now they're going into a competitive process that's far bigger and more complicated. Or it could be that they want to improve their win rate, their success rate, or actually that they're in diversification or growth lenses that they're looking through. But in any extent, whatever the driver is, it's about wanting to build on those skills that they've got. but an almost equitable split, so 48% haven't done this before. So of those 11,000 businesses that we're dealing with, almost half of them are looking at the public sector for the first time. So I think the support probably differs in terms of which lens you're looking at it from. I've never done this before, versus I've tried it, I've not been successful, or this is a natural evolution of my journey with you. So one of the things that Go for Growth is really keen on is opening up the marketplace to providers, to make them aware, in this case, that the public sector could be a helpful and useful and stable client. So if you come to any of our tender ready training webinars, for example, one of the placeholder slides is why the public sector. There is something for everyone in there. Public services are not going anywhere. So we're actively trying to turn businesses to look at the public sector, so to grow that local business market, which is what we're seeing in that 48%. And then if we think about demographic for a second, so those businesses that would consider themselves as Black, Asian or minority ethnic led, almost a third of all businesses that we're supporting would consider themselves BAME led, 71% wouldn't. And in terms of female leadership, so a little bit over a third, 36% would consider themselves female led. And of course, actually, there will be organisations who are both Black, Asian and minority ethnic and female leadership organisations. So both of those things are at play. And what's really interesting, I think, to Go for Growth is that, and we're going to talk through some of the top challenges shortly, but when you apply demographic lenses, the priorities of what the biggest challenges are can often change per demographic. And I'll talk you through that a little bit in a second. And in terms of who we're supporting, there are no closed doors to Go for Growth. So any organisation from any sector of any size can come to us for support and help. But unsurprisingly, we're most active helping micro, sole traders and small businesses. So 69% micro or sole traders, 23% small, and the definition is as per the government definition of small up to 49 employees. And I'll tell you a little bit about what they're telling us the challenges are. And so these are the top 5 challenges. So the top 79%, so the top 2 are around understanding how to demonstrate their value to public sector procurers. 79% of businesses that we talk to tell us that's their top priority. And the way that Go for Growth works is we build the evidence-based intelligence. They're an action research-based company. We gather the intelligence and then we build the support to fit the need from the marketplace. And so you will have seen from Go for Growth that we are hosting something called the Public Sector Supply Ready accreditation. It's free of charge for businesses to go through. It comes with 12 CPD hours, continued professional development hours. We've developed that on the back of businesses telling us that they want to be able to demonstrate their value to public sector. They want to be able to demonstrate their readiness, their preparedness. They want to demonstrate their understanding of the public sector. And so the PSSR, the Public Sector Supply Ready accreditation, is just one mechanism of doing that. It's certainly not the only one, but it's just one mechanism of doing that. And the same amount would be keen to develop their bid writing skills. And that, I think, relates back to what we were talking about a second ago in terms of that bid and competition capability being a concern for buyers. It's also a concern for suppliers. There is certainly an agreement there that businesses would like to develop their bid writing skills. And so we have put on 4 lunch and learn sessions. We run local tender ready training. So we've just done a series of 5 workshops for Impact Hub Bradford. We have a half-day bid skills course coming up later in the year. We have bid skills courses through our learning management system that go out locally. So we respond to these requirements, but those are the top things that SMEs are telling us. And lots of organisations tell us, and again, this will relate back to the social media point that we just made. They tell us that they don't know where to find the opportunity in the first place. And so we're, thinking about how do you get those opportunities in front of the marketplace that you're trying to engage. So 63% of all people that we're talking to and supporting said they don't know where to start in terms of finding the most appropriate public sector opportunity. And of course, there's lots of portals out there. So it's not the case of pointing them to one place necessarily, although Contract Finder and Finder Tender can obviously be very helpful in that sense. And Lauren in Go for Growth is our self-proclaimed portal guru. We have tutorial videos for almost all portals, but if you're using a portal and we don't have a how to use it video, then please let us know and we'll definitely make one. But we try to help businesses to use the portals and the search engines to figure out where to find the most appropriate opportunities. In terms of marketing their business more effectively, often we see in small businesses that they might absolutely be the artisan, the expert at what they do, but they don't necessarily, and Go for Growth is just as guilty of this, don't necessarily tell anybody about it, or we don't necessarily do that very effectively. And that can often mean that we don't have everything in the toolkit ready for public sector tenders. So things like case studies, references, for example, might not be readily available. And of course, they're often required in either selection or you can use them as evidence in evaluation. And then we're definitely seeing lots more collaboration and consortia approach. So 59% of businesses tell us that they're really keen to improve their network to help them win new work. That's not just in public sector, actually, that is just as prevalent in private sector as well. But as opportunities aggregate up in public sector, then the more requirement there is for businesses to have the time and the ability to come together. And we do finding people to work with consortia collaboration partnership type events. We do 2 a year. And we have done a few with the University of Cardiff, Professor Dr. Jane Lynch, who is certainly a leading voice on collaboration. And what she says is it can take at least 6 months to form a partnership to be able to bid for work collaboratively. And so for buyers, the message is if you think that collaboration, consortia, partnership is a driver for you, and it often is for public sector commissioners, think about the timescales of that and how can you engage the market so they have time to find each other. And then I did mention shortly ago that those top 5 can change when you apply those demographic lenses. So, for example, in the female leadership lens, the top priority actually is about bid writing skills. 98% of all those 36% of organisations have said that bid writing skills is the single biggest priority for them. And similarly, if you look at Black, Asian and minority ethnic demographic, those priorities will also move around, and they can move around quite considerably. And again, the messaging for buyers and commissioners is that if you are a procurement professional, understanding the market and the needs of those different sectors and the different demographics is super important to being able to develop and offer the appropriate and relevant support and guidance that is required by the marketplace. There's a lot of words on these next few slides, and there are 3 slides of recommendations. I'm not going to read them verbatim. You can have a look at them. If you've got any questions about anything I don't cover in the next few minutes, please do give us a shout. I'm going to pick out a few, actually. I think in terms of defining even and analysing your current spend, that baseline, we saw in the survey results that 30% didn't know what they were spending with small to medium enterprises. So that leads us to think, well, actually, the aspiration to do more is real and it's alive and well. But understanding how you do that and how you do that better and how you do more of it, and understanding the diversity in your supply chain is just going to be super difficult if you don't know what you're currently doing. And therefore, defining a target without a baseline is a little bit of an exercise in futility. So there is a real need, I think, to understand what the now looks like. It's really important. And I think if we think about definitions also, although we do have a government-led definition for SME, which did change. So it used to be 249 employees. Was the upper employee limit. Now it's 499, so that has moved. So that will change reporting and might actually mask become a red herring actually to knowing what we're doing at the smaller end of that SME definition. But in your organisation, understanding what diverse means, understanding what small is, it can be really powerful and really useful, and actually really helpful also for the marketplace as well as internally. I also want to pick up something that I find myself talking about a lot actually, and it might be a little controversial. So PPN 1120, um, which is, some time ago now, but there was that guidance around reserving lower value contracts for SMEs locally. And if you're in a local authority, I think it's Section 17 of the Local Government Act. Forgive me if that is incorrect, but I'm pretty sure it's Section 17. It means that there's actually some thought processes that even if it's under threshold, it might not be lawful to reserve lower contracts for SMEs in the way that the guidance lays out. And there are obviously counter arguments for that. So there are communities who think it's absolutely fine, and there are communities who think that it isn't. And I think the point of bringing it up from a Go for Growth perspective is that the guidance is there, but because of that sort of, is it okay or isn't it okay? Actually, not an awful lot is getting done, if anything. It's just not typically being used, but it could be a really great way of engaging the local SME community or the local voluntary sector community for those lower value contracts. And that typically is going to be where smaller organisations are going to be most active. And again, in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, this is something I was looking at just recently. It's a link to the relaxation of Section 17 as hosted by localgovernmentlawyer.co.uk in relationship with, I think it's Section 116 in Procurement Act 23. Have a read, because it could be really useful for your organisation to think about actually actively reserving opportunities small to medium enterprises. And I think the other thing is about transparency and engagement. The more you can talk to the market will always tell us more is more. The market understands that things change, things move around. It's the same with pipelines. Please put it on there. Don't worry if you need to take it off again. But more is more in terms of talking to the market and really understanding what the market has to offer, engaging with the market to help build the specification and your procurement processes, and that will also help develop the market going forward. The National Procurement Policy Statement, and I know there's one due out in June, I think, has got some fairly concrete guidance on things like pipelines. But it's above 2 million, and so small to medium enterprises are typically not active at that level. So you're really looking around 250,000 and below, even 100,000 and below. Under threshold is where lots of SMEs are going to be most active. But if you are thinking about higher values, then that consortia collaboration and partnership piece plays in as well. 6 months to set up a decent consortium. If you don't know what's coming, if that engagement isn't there, and I know the Procurement Act is building in lots more engagement, lots more notices to come out, lots more pre-market engagement type approach. So hopefully that will differ as we move forward with the Procurement Act. And there's lots of support out there. So obviously I'm representing Go for Growth today, but we're aware that we're just one of plenty of organisations. We are not trying to be, nor could we be, all things to all people. In a local area, you'll have enterprise organisations, bid growth hubs in your local area. There are other organisations, Federation of Small Businesses, chambers, etc., that can help support small to medium enterprises and the voluntary sector locally. On behalf of Go for Growth, all our support is offered free of charge to the marketplace, and we've tried to do that specifically so that there's no cost barrier for the marketplace to access the support. But the message really is, whatever that guidance or whoever that guidance and support is from, provide it as much as you can and signpost really well to it. And I did want to pick out feedback also, actually. So as part of a research program that we did, we talked to 100 bidding organisations, and 35% of those organisations that we talked to said they'd never got any feedback at all beyond the thanks but no thanks, better luck next time. And of course, if you're under threshold and you're in public sector procurement, you're not obliged to give feedback. You're not obliged to give scores. You're not obliged to give any detailed feedback. You're not obliged to give the assessment summaries as it will be under the Procurement Act. What I will say, however, as an organisation, and we've supported lots of businesses where they've come to us and said, well, we got a thanks, but no thanks, but nothing else. Literally, we don't know what our score was. We don't know how we scored in comparison to the winning bidder. And so we actually don't know what we need to change. We don't know how to get better. So what I will say is, if you can at least, no matter what the value is, give the score versus the winning score and even the most basic areas for improvement. And obviously, I would say more is more. I do understand the challenge of that from a procurement perspective, but the more you can give, the more you can do, the more helpful it will be to developing the marketplace. If we want, as I said right at the top of this, we want good quality answers. We want to award work to the right organisations, but we would love for that to be a representation of a diverse community and especially of smaller organisations as well. If we can help by sharing anything around where improvements need to be made, then that will only help the marketplace to develop. And we're flirting with things like model answers at the minute. What we have done so far, though, we've done some tender ready training, and we did this with the City of Bradford Council for the first time a few months ago, where we've got a mock specification, we've got a mock evaluation criteria, mock questions and mock answers that were scored by real evaluators. And we've done this with about 150 bidding organisations over a number of events now. And what we ask them to do is score the mock answers in line with the specification and evaluation criteria. So that the training teaches the group how to do that. And then we ask them to score. And it's super interesting, actually, thinking about the scores in comparison to evaluator scores. So the providers often score much higher than evaluators do. The other thing I would pick out is simplifying terms and conditions, bid requirements as much as possible. So one of the organisations we've worked with in London, their terms and conditions document was something like 58 pages long, and they've reduced that to 9. And so it's now much more accessible to smaller organisations. And the final thing on recommendations, I think, with 5.5 million businesses in the UK classified as SMEs, the public sector procurement community just couldn't cope, actually, if all of that community were dealing directly on contracts with the public sector. So this isn't just about direct engagement. It's about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and flowing that desire in a contractual way from tier 1 to the lower tiers and setting those expectations and goals really well. Often tier 1 organisations will do some work locally, but also just as often they will work with organisations that they want to work with or have worked with before. And as a private sector organisation, they can do that. So there is an onus and responsibility on commissioning organisations at the top of that family tree to make sure that contractually it flows through to the local voluntary sector, not-for-profit and local business community where appropriate. And of course, in public sector, we do have to be careful with disaggregation, but actually, if there's a compliant route to breaking larger contracts down into either smaller contracts or smaller lots, that can be really useful to small to medium enterprises. And this is a really busy slide, and there is a handout that will come out with this. So I'll send you the handout. We put together a 3 just 3 steps, some tips for getting started with marketplace development. Again, I won't talk through all of it, but some top tips around here. That baselining point is in there. Make sure you know what your current spend is and understanding what you're trying to achieve. Then you can think about mapping your journey from A to B. Engagement and signposting is super important. That action one was all about promoting the power of procurement. We have such an opportunity in procurement to develop the marketplace. I don't think there's another function actually that has the opportunity the way that we have in procurement, but engagement and signposting is going to be potentially a crucial thing that either creates success or can limit success. Communication's key, defining the market that you're trying to engage, get feedback from providers and use that feedback. And as we've said before, use of social media. Don't limit communication of engagement to procurement portals. Not all providers are on them. So think about where your market is, where they're active and how you can get to them. In terms of practical stuff, in terms of process, practice and paperwork, think about what you've got in your toolkit. Could you reserve procurements under threshold for SMEs in the local area? Are your weightings proportionate? Do they work? Are you asking for proportionate and relative requirements, such as your insurances, your accreditations, etc.? Are you really risk averse and therefore creating barriers for SMEs? Can you disaggregate compliantly where that could help with market responses? Have you got language barriers in there? So is your procurement written in procurement speak? Is there jargon? Is there acronyms? Are there mechanisms in place to support providers where they have additional needs or English isn't the first language, for example? And then the last couple of things, actually. So artificial intelligence, AI, I mean, it's a super hot topic at the minute. And PPN 0224 came out earlier this year on the use of artificial intelligence in bids. I'm not certain there's a right answer on this at the minute. So what you'll get is probably just my very personal view. Bid writers and bid reviewers have been supporting bids ad infinitum. That it's not new news. Lots of organisations, regardless of size, actually go out and ask for support in bids. I'm not clear why artificial intelligence would be any different to that. In a current bid, you're not asked, and I've not seen one, so somebody might be doing it, but I've not seen a bid ask if you've had any external support. But under PPN 0224, there is a recommendation that you might write into your procurement, have you used AI? And I just don't know whether that would actually make it less fair rather than fairer. I'm not quite clear on what the PPN is actually trying to achieve. I do think, however, AI can actually be really useful in levelling the playing field for micro, SME and VCS organisations who have less time, less resources and less ability to absorb bidding costs. And every bid costs an organisation in cash, but also in times and resources. Things like ChatGPT, Claude.ai, for example, other AI platforms, and there's lots of them, let's face it. They can help to increase capacity of bidding organisations to manage the bid process. Of course, as it would with any other external support, it comes with all the health warnings in terms of intellectual property, whether you can deliver what you've written down in your bid. So it isn't about writing something that bears no resemblance to your organisation, but I think there is something in there about AI maximising your ability to take part. And I think the conversation will roll on for a long time, and there will obviously be pros and cons. You know, using different technologies, different types of supports comes with, you know, lots of good advantages and lots of disadvantages. But I think it's a really interesting topic and one that will rumble on. And then finally, if I pick up the Procurement Act 2023, what does it mean for SMEs? One of the things I would say is that, you know, through our business of supporting 11,000 organisations, there is still, I think, a lack of understanding on the current regulatory framework, PCR 15. And of course, what we'll have from the 28th of October is a new regulatory framework. So for a period of years, we'll have concurrent regulatory frameworks. And so I think what that might mean in practical terms for smaller organisations is it's potentially going to get harder before it gets easier. And if businesses are struggling to understand PCR 15, we've got to try and help them to continue to try and understand and upskill on PCR 15, but also from the 28th of October to understand the Procurement Act. So effectively, in a way, it doubles up on the support that's required for the marketplace. The guidance is coming out from the Cabinet Office. One of the things that Go for Growth is doing is trying to distill that guidance into shorter bursts through webinars, through TikTok videos, through lots of different resources and mechanisms. And one of the things that we've done, so YPO and Go for Growth have come together again to design and produce a free SME guide to the Procurement Act 2023, which we hope to be issuing over the next few weeks. Keep an eye out on both of our social media for it, or you can drop me an email to let me know that you want a copy once it's ready and we'll send it over. Hopefully it will be a useful short guide tool for SMEs to understand and prepare for the changes coming. And I think the Act in itself, some of the things that will create potential challenges for understanding of the new regulations for SMEs is actually the new flexible procedure. I think it's great for public sector to be able to practically design from an outcomes-led basis on a much more flexible basis. But actually that will be harder to teach to small to medium enterprises because there will be lots of variation in that process potentially. We already find that frameworks and DPSs, dynamic purchasing systems, are an area where businesses and smaller businesses don't necessarily always understand how they work. And so the change in frameworks, the longer length of reopening points, depending on how you obviously take them out. And DPS is evolving into dynamic markets will, again, I think add some layers into complexity, I think, for organisations to wrap their head around. And from a debarment perspective, it's definitely created some fear, and for what it's worth, I don't think it should. But the debarment list has meant organisations are worrying about whether they will fall foul of supplier measurement and contract management processes and actually end up in a worse position for working for the public sector and trying hard than if they hadn't entered in the first place. So we're doing quite a lot of work to try and dispel some of the myths around that. And then finally, and the single biggest thing, and then I'll move on for questions, is I think the Procurement Act, what it could give positively is the central digital platform. The ability to tell the public sector once about who you are, what you do, what your policies are, what insurances you've got, to qualify once, could be pretty transformational. So hopefully that won't take long to get to its full sense of potential. And that was everything that I wanted to talk through today. So I will just move over to some questions. We have about 5 minutes left on the clock. If anyone's got any questions, please feel free. I'll just have a quick check on the Q&A. There's nothing in there just at the minute. Whilst people are just thinking about whether there are any questions or not, I can see we have a hand raised. So let me see if I can come to you 1 second. Sean, if you would like to talk, I think you can now. Anybody wanted to say something? Let me see. What is considered a reasonable to provide bid training from a contracting authority to a supplier as part of pre-market engagement? I'm not sure there is a prescription on it at the minute. I know it's difficult actually when I said more is more, because that is a little bit, I guess, unhelpful to a contracting authority. What we see as really useful in Go for Growth is providing some space, carving out some space and time in a friendly way that allows organizations to understand what you're trying to achieve. So some of the best processes we've supported have had specification type webinars where providers are able to ask questions about what is being procured and enter commentary into that, so that can be taken into account as part of the final specification. And having in conjunction with clarification questions, drop-in sessions. Now that's easy when it's Go for Growth doing it because we're independent of a contracting authority. That's less easy if you're doing it on your own, and obviously clarification questions are the medium that you would do it. I don't know that there is a definition for what's considered reasonable. I think it is very subjective based on the complexity, the size of market, the value, the risk, etc. But marketplaces tell us the more that you can talk to them, the earlier you can talk to them, and the more detail that you're able to give is super helpful to them. Are there any other questions, or does anybody else want to have a chat? No? Okay. If anybody wants to chat with me after, when the slide deck comes out, my contact details are on there. You can book a one-to-one Teams session with me, or we can chat via email or via mobile, etc. Please do feel free to get in touch. I'm happy to chat to anyone. We have another question in terms of publishing scores. Do you do all scores or just the top one and the one that you're feeding back on? If you're asking, are you giving scores to everybody that bid? Oh, I see. I think I understand the question. So you would normally give the bidder's score versus the winning score. So that top score of who won versus the score that you got. And then you might be saying, and actually this is why. And the assessment summaries in the Procurement Act do take care of that. But of course, under threshold, And currently, you don't need to do that. But if you can say you scored 78%, the winning bidder scored 95%, here is the delta, any basic information on what that bidder could have done better or what was missing is useful. I know that is often a challenging situation for public sector, but if we want the marketplace to develop, I think it's certainly a consideration that we need to chat through and see what we can do on it. Any other questions? No. Okay. Like I say, if anybody does have anything, please do feel free to get in touch. We'll chat. Do we use AI currently? Yes, we do. We don't necessarily use it in bids, but we use AI all the time in lots of different mechanisms. And it is super useful as a micro social enterprise. We use it probably fairly extensively, and we caveat it with all of those health warnings that I mentioned. So we use it to help us with research, for example. We use it to help us with document drafting. There's lots of ways that we use AI currently. I'm quite pro it, but I also am quite realistic, I think, in terms of it can't be and shouldn't be the answer to everything, in the same way that there is no one answer to everything. Hope that helps. Okay, we're a minute over time. I know everyone's super busy. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We'll get a copy of the slide deck and the recording out by latest close of play tomorrow. In the meantime, everybody have a good rest of your Thursday. Thank you again for coming, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon. Thank you.